Part 46. Rebirth of Fantasy, Obtain the Sect System. Author, Red General. Chapter 451. The human temple is no longer the original human temple. The interior has long been filled with maggots and turned into a puddle of mud. Rakeage and corruption are enough to describe this power. Soon, this power will be destroyed. We'll just watch it then. The man nodded with satisfaction at the figure's reply, but seemed to have thought of something and asked again. Brother, are we really going to find the profound heaven sect? The figure nodded heavily and said, Of course I want to go. Brother, why is this? Do you have any obsession with this force? There was a trace of confusion on the man's face. He was a little confused when the figure said he was going to find the profound heaven sect. There are so many forces in the world, why go to profound heaven sect? Is there something in profound heaven sect that Big Brother wants? Hearing this, the figure smiled, looked into the distance, and replied softly. As far as I know, the force of profound heaven sect is the only one suitable for us among thousands of forces. If we miss this power, we will have no choice but to wander outside and become independent cultivators bullied by everyone for the rest of our lives. Our future will be slim. The man looked stunned. This was the first time he heard his elder brother say this. He scratched his head and said nothing more. Follow the figure and leave here. And Dylan, who appeared high in the sky, continued to speak righteously. Letting a little demon race bully our human race is truly a shame to our human race and brings disgrace to our human race's temple. What's more, this demon race doesn't even care about the rules set back then and directly attacks our human race. This is completely provoking me and the human race. So I have decided that I will personally take action in this incident, take control of the overall situation, and personally eradicate those beasts that kill my human race. Having said this, Dylan paused for a while, slowly exhaled, and then bowed to the earth. But I am also deeply sorry for those who have lost their loved ones. After this incident, I will give you a dragon pill to express my apology. The voice of Dylan's words was like the sound of nature, spreading throughout all human realms. Some people hiding in the mountains or hiding underground heard this, and there was a glimmer of hope in their eyes. This glimmer of hope also allows those who have fled into darkness to regain their light. Hope shone brightly in his eyes, which were originally empty, and he knelt down with tears in his eyes. But some people felt disdain and ridicule to this statement. What's the use of saying this now? Is it just a statement? Why didn't you say it before demon race attacked the human realm? Are you saying it at this time? Do you really think they are fools? But even if other forces come together to block my demon race's offensive, will I, demon race, be afraid of you? When other forces hiding in the dark heard this, they couldn't help but frown and didn't pay much attention. After hearing the conversation of these demon race strong men, the expression of a man in black robe at the head did not change. The hall fell into silence, and everyone did not dare to take a breath. They only dared to lower their heads and wait for the next instructions. This human temple is really one thing in front of others and another behind their backs. Sure enough, a group of hypocrites, at this time of life and death, actually want to use the strength to weaken other forces. At this time, in the deliberation hall, we instruct the master of this palace to order the masters of the three sects to send powerful men above the immortal king to the major realms of the human race to resist the demon race's attack. Some people have already seen the disgusting appearance of the human temple. In addition, we need them to take back the lost Tianluo domain at all costs. The masters of the three sects did not dare to neglect when they heard this, and quickly led the strong men in their sects to resist in various major realms. Before the two of them could finish speaking, a powerful aura hit the two of them, and the two of them spit out a mouthful of rich blood and fell to their knees. After finishing speaking, in the loud conversation among everyone, the shadow of Emperor Lin gradually dissipated and disappeared into dust and smoke. The two deputy palace masters on the left and right glanced at Dylan, thought for a while, then raised their hands and asked. Dylan snorted coldly, his eyes were extremely cold, as if he was looking at a dead person. Palace Master, we all know the current situation. Do we really want to fight to the death against demon race? On the first seat, Dylan put his hands behind his back, looking down at the senior officials with a pair of eyes as bright as the galaxy, without making a single sound. Don't think that I don't know what you are doing secretly? Normally, I would just turn a blind eye, but not now. Demon race leads an army to attack our human realm. If our human temple doesn't stop, if you resist, you will be in danger of annihilation. My human realm has been invaded by demon race. I hope those forces hiding in the dark can give me some help. Let us destroy the foreign enemies together and rebuild our former homeland. Without the demon-suppressing sword, the human temple is just a slightly more powerful ant. Sooner or later, you will surrender to me, demon race. In response to these words, they had sarcastic smiles on their faces. After hearing this, their foreheads were covered with dense cold sweat, and they quickly lowered their heads and agreed. When the others heard this, they smiled coldly, shook their heads and said, "Of course I'm not afraid. I, demon race, am invincible." Demon race, who was hiding in the dark, raised his eyebrows when he saw this scene, with a hint of disdain and sneer on his face. In just half a stick of incense, orders were issued one after another. "I will obey the order of the palace master." Dylan did not speak, as if he was very disappointed with the two of them. Then he looked at everyone with his eyes and ordered. "By then, it will be too late." After hearing this, everyone was shocked, understanding the importance of this matter, and then nodded solemnly. "In this case, you still want to escape. That's what the Lord of the Palace taught you." But Dylan hadn't finished speaking yet. This was just a small trick of his. He opened his hands and shouted loudly. Demon race also noticed the reinforcements from the human race. After thinking for a while, he stopped attacking and retreated. Anyway, it doesn't threaten their power. No matter how demon race attacks the human race, they can't control it. With the addition of the three disciples, it was obviously easier for other forces to resist the strong demon race. Rebirth of Fantasy, obtain the Sect system. Author, Red General. Chapter 452. At this time, the demon race camp is on a giant car that reaches the sky forged from heaven and earth crystals. Three old men with old faces were sitting cross-legged, their brows furrowed, as if they were talking. The auras emanating from the three people were as terrifying as the underworld, making people feel awe and dare not look directly at them. These three people are the three elders of demon race. The human temple has sent three strong men to reinforce each domain. The current situation is not good, and the strong men sent by demon race are not enough to fight against it. I think it would be better to report such a big matter to the demon lord in a serious manner first. The great elder demon race looked at the two deist figures beside him and said in a deep voice. The two looked at each other when they heard this, but then shook their heads and objected. "Why should I report such a trivial matter to the demon lord? It's just that the strong men from the three sects sent by the human race temple came to support me. I, the demon race, have countless strong men, and those who can fight are like raindrops. Am I still afraid of them? Besides, the demon emperor personally accompanied us here this time. Now he is having a fierce battle with a powerful ancestor. There is no need to be afraid of the human temple." Hearing this, the great elder glanced at him, but still shook his head resolutely and said, "No, this matter must be reported to the demon lord. What we are fighting is not a force in the human temple, but the entire human race. If something goes wrong, can you and I afford it? Don't think that we have become blindly confident because we have won a great victory before and also occupied a domain of the human race. Let me ask you, How many forces in the human race are actually taking action on the surface now? After hearing this, the two of them looked startled. Before they could answer, the great elder continued. The human temple only uses the strong men of the three sects now, and their real power has not yet been used. In addition, there is the Seven Kills Palace. They only sent strong men from the branch hall to fight against us, while the strong men from the main hall stayed still and watched secretly, not sure what they were planning. Regardless of what the Seven Kills Hall does, the mysterious Profound Heaven Sect is what we should worry about. Don't forget, Profound Heaven Sect was also the first force that was said to be a threat by the Demon Lord. From the beginning of the war to now, this force has made no moves at all. It seems to be sitting on the mountain and watching the fight between tigers and tigers. And the two major forces under them, the Soul Palace and the Shadow Palace, are also missing. This is enough for us to be more vigilant. Don't forget the fight we had with the Soul Palace a few years ago. After hearing these coherent words, the two elders did not refute, but lowered their heads and fell into thinking. After a while, they nodded. Okay, we listen to you. Seeing this scene, the great elder looked at the two of them deeply and said nothing more. Immediately afterwards, an order was passed into the ears of the Demon Lord. On the other side, a quiet place full of darkness. Countless chaotic laws flow here, thunder and lightning are raging, and void turbulence appears from time to time. And in the center of this chaotic law, there is a man wearing a black robe with a dark aura. This person is the devil. The Demon Lord, who had his eyes tightly closed, suddenly opened his eyes, and an extremely powerful aura erupted from his body. With a roar, the chaotic law was instantly shaken back 100 meters. Seeing this, the Demon Lord clenched his fists and a satisfied smile appeared on his lips. Immediately, he put his hands behind his back and looked into the distance. He already knew the news that the human temple was supporting the human realm, but he didn't pay much attention to it. Instead, just instruct the three elders to do what they want in their hearts. After all, the Demon Lord has never put the human temple in his eyes, and now his strength has already surpassed everyone. He is not taking action now, just because he is afraid of being noticed by the 10 domain lords. Otherwise, these 10 domains would have been his world. Besides, there is a saying that is good. When you are strong, remember not to tell anyone. Instead, choose to be low-key and reserved, hide in the dark, and wait for opportunities. This is the case with the current Demon Lord. He only observes all situations behind the scenes and is the person in power in the dark. Throughout the chaos in the world, he remained calm-faced. In the blink of an eye, 10 years have passed. Qin Xian, who was in the Profound Heaven Sect space, also opened his eyes at this time, with a hint of golden light in his deep eyes. The terrifying aura on his body was like an ancient giant waking up, powerful and irresistible. At that moment, the world seemed to fall into silence, and time seemed to have stopped at this moment. Seeing this scene, Qin Xian didn't change his expression. With a wave of his hand, the world returned to its original state. Immediately, he stood up, clenched his fists, felt the flow of mana in his body, and couldn't help but reveal a smile. In 10 years, his strength once again returned to the Immortal Emperor realm, and he also reached the pinnacle of Immortal Emperor. Only one step away from reaching Deo Ancestor. It is indeed a realm created by another system. I'm afraid that the current Immortal Emperor, who is at the peak of his power, is not my one-in-one enemy. Qin Xian chuckled softly, and then the figure disappeared from this area and appeared high in the sky in Profound Heaven Sect. A pair of dark eyes looked down, then smiled and nodded with satisfaction. At this time, the voice of the system sounded in my mind. Ding, the system has been upgraded in order to avoid adverse effects on the host. We will give you a special gift package. Hearing this, Qin Xian raised his eyebrows, shook his head helplessly and said, "Hey, system, didn't you already turn into a ghost at that time? Now that you have recovered, why don't you show up and stay in my body? It seemed that he had already guessed that Qin Xian would ask this question. The next moment, Qin Xian's figure appeared in an unknown place. At this moment, a cloud-like figure appeared in front of Qin Xian. The first time he saw the figure, Qin Xian showed curious eyes. Before he could ask a question, the figure spoke out. What you see now is just a thought of mine. I have not fully recovered in 10 years. It will take at least some years before I can see you again. I'm sorry for this, so I won't be able to answer too many of your questions in the future. After all, it consumes too much energy. I hope you understand. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Rebirth of Fantasy, Obtain the Sect System. Author, Red General. Chapter 453. Hearing this, Qin Xian didn't care and nodded slightly. Although he didn't care on his face, he was still a little suspicious in his heart. After all, he remembered that the system itself said that he only needed to complete the upgrade to return to the complete body. How could there be signs that the recovery has not been completed yet? But Qin Xian didn't want to ask too much, so he suppressed his thoughts. Then he opened his eyes again and had returned to the high altitude of Profound Heaven Sect. Seeing this, Qin Xian breathed out lightly and said, "The system opens the gift package. Ding, congratulations to the host for obtaining the source of the abyss. Ding, congratulations to the host for gaining imperial power." As the words fell, the void in this area began to gradually tremble. With a bang, the space shattered, and a black light ball broke through the void and came to Qin Xian. At the same time, Qin Xian's temperament also gradually changed, and a faint terrifying pressure flashed through his body. Seeing this scene, Qin Xian frowned. Although every strong person has coercion, it is only useful for those with low realms, but has no effect on those with high realms. Dai Wei can perfectly avoid this. Once the full force is released, even the Domain Lord will feel slightly threatened. This is the terror of Emperor Wei. Of course, in layman's terms, it's actually just a bluff. It's just a dispensable thing anyway. Qin Xian shook his head and stopped paying attention to this Emperor Wei. He raised his eyes and looked at the major peaks of the Profound Heaven Sect. Nowadays, on every mountain peak in the Profound Heaven Sect, there is a powerful formation called the Star Formation. As the name suggests, each mountain peak is a star. As long as they are united, they can turn into vast stars. And the combined formation can withstand the full attack of 10 powerful ancestors. The person who created this formation is Qian Yuexin. That formation genius who was unprecedented and unprecedented. He is also the current pavilion master of the formation pavilion. Then Qin Xian's figure appeared in Tianqian Hall. At this time, Lin Tian was also sitting cross-legged at the head of the table. When he noticed Qin Xian's aura, he immediately opened his eyes. Seeing Qin Xian's figure, he was happy, and he hurriedly came over, bowed his hands and said, "Master." Qin Xian nodded slightly, patted his shoulder, and said with a smile, "I have worked hard for you in the past 10 years, and I will leave the rest to my teacher." Hearing this, Lin Tian felt relieved, took a breath, and stepped aside. At this time, all the high-level experts from Profound Heaven Sect came out of seclusion and looked at Tianqian Palace in unison. When Qin Xian appeared, he no longer concealed it and released his aura with all his strength. The next moment, dozens of powerful figures suddenly appeared in the originally empty hall. I finally saw that familiar figure from behind. The section. The sect master. An old man with an old face said softly, and his rickety body instantly stood upright. A glimmer of light flashed in the cloudy eyes. It was joy and excitement, plus excitement. The sect master is not dead, the sect master is still alive. Everyone cheered inwardly, and there was no majestic look in front of the disciples at all. Instead, they were full of smiles. Qin Xian heard the call from the figure behind him, turned around, looked at everyone with a smile, and said, "After more than 10 years apart, how are you?" Hearing this, everyone nodded and choked with sobs. "Okay, of course it's good, but it's better if you're fine, master." Shangguan Xianfeng, who was among the crowd, looked at the scene in front of him, tears filled his eyes, and he burst into tears. A pair of beautiful eyes were filled with tears. Huo Yi, who was next to him, saw this scene and said nothing, but stood in front of her very carefully. It seemed that he wanted to use his tall body to block her sad face. Except for Shangguan Xianfeng, Qin Xian's other two disciples also had extremely complicated eyes. There were many emotions in his eyes. There is surprise, joy, and disappointment. But most of them were happy about Qin Xian's return. Qin Xian secretly saw this, and out of the corner of his eye, he glanced at Shangguan Xianfeng, who was hiding behind Huo Yi. Shangguan Xianfeng was okay, but Qin Xian really didn't know what to do with these two people. Among Qin Xian's 4 apprentices, Li Qingxian and Li Qingfeng were the ones who took the least care of them. After all, Qin Xian, as the head of a sect, needs to deal with some important matters and rarely stays with them. That is to say, I will teach them how to practice when they have nothing to do. Qin Xian felt a little guilty for these two people. As a master, he should always stay with his disciples, teach them how to practice, and teach them how to behave. However, Qin Xian failed to do these things and asked other strong men from the sect to teach him on his behalf. Well. Qin Xian sighed inwardly, withdrew his eyes and looked at everyone, his expression gradually becoming serious. Seeing this, everyone understood and put away their expressions. They stood on both sides in a polite manner and looked at Qin Xian respectfully. Then Qin Xian's figure appeared on the throne, his eyes looked down at everyone, he coughed slightly and said in a deep voice, "I have known some things over the years, and you don't need to report them one by one. Of course, there are some things I haven't told you. In fact, I have returned more than 10 years ago. The reason why I haven't shown up yet is that my strength dropped to Immortal Sovereign at that time, which was not enough to show up. Body. And now 10 years have passed, and my strength has already returned to Immortal Emperor, and has reached its peak. After all, if I showed up, I would be afraid that something bad would happen. Of course, there is another point, that is, I am observing the current situation in the 10 domains." After hearing Qin Xian's coherent words, everyone looked at each other, but they didn't say much and just nodded. Seeing this scene, Qin Xian did not intend to talk nonsense, but directly said what he should do this time. Half an hour later, everyone walked out of Tianqian Hall one by one, but there was a hint of solemnity on their expressions. At this moment, there are still several figures in Tianqian Hall. They are Lin Tian, Bloodthirsty, and Mo Chen. Looking at the 3 figures, Qin Xian raised his eyes and looked at them. "The matters between the major realms will be left to the 3 of you. I hope you won't disappoint me." Hearing this, the 3 of them nodded solemnly, and immediately their figures disappeared into Tianqian Hall. After the 3 people left, Qin Xian stood up, looking at the starry sky somewhere, and showed a smile. "I don't know how the 2 major forces have considered it. I hope the decision you make will not disappoint me." Qin Xian murmured, and his figure disappeared into the void. Rebirth of Fantasy, obtain the Sect system. Author, Red General. Chapter 454. After half a stick of incense, the realm of life and death. Under a bloody city, Lin Tian appeared here wearing black clothes and his face covered by a bamboo hat. Looking at the nearby scenes and the fishy smell lingering in the air, Lin Tian couldn't help but frowned, and then raised his eyes to look at the city in front of him. The scene in front of me was extremely bleak. There were several corpses hanging on the city wall, and there were bloodstains everywhere. At the city gate, there were countless corpses turned into pieces. In addition, the rules of this space are also somewhat confusing. It seemed that a fierce fight had just occurred. Seeing this scene, Lin Tian sighed slightly and walked straight into the city without thinking too much. After half a stick of incense, he came to an extremely shabby attic. Although there are ruins and wreckage everywhere near the attic, although the attic in front of you is broken, there are no traces of blood. It seemed as if it had been cleaned up before. Lin Tian turned a blind eye to this scene, stood there, looked around, chuckled, and said in a deep voice, "The order of Profound Heaven Sect has come, the leader comes to receive the order." As soon as he finished speaking, Lin Tian's voice instantly spread throughout the city like a bell. At this moment, several black shadows suddenly appeared in the originally dilapidated city. In the blink of an eye, dozens more black shadows began to appear one after another, like stars appearing out of thin air in the starry sky. Their goals are very similar, both in Lin Tian's direction. Within a moment, hundreds of black shadows with powerful auras surrounded Lin Tian. Their eyes were cold and their expressions were indifferent. The murderous intent emanating from their bodies soared into the sky, like one killing god after another coming into the world. The next moment, a burly man with a strong aura stepped out of the crowd. With every step he takes, there will be a shattering sound in the void, and the law will follow his footsteps. It seems that he is the master of this area. But when the strong man saw Lin Tian for the first time, he immediately restrained his aura, knelt down on one knee, cupped his hands and said, "Wu Bing, the master of the branch hall of the Shadow Palace, takes the order." The next moment, hundreds of black shadows showing murderous intent were all kneeling down at this moment. The killing intent that shot straight into the sky also disappeared at this moment. Seeing this situation, Lin Tian's expression remained unchanged, as it seemed to be a common sight. With a slight movement of thought, a ball of light quickly entered Wu Bing's mind. Feeling the fluctuations in his mind, Wu Bing's face was shocked, and a trace of shock flashed in his scarlet pupils, but he quickly hid it. Lin Tian came over and patted his shoulder, looking at him with raised eyebrows. "From today onwards, you branch hall masters will be led by me. Do you have any objections?" Since it is an order issued by the sect, we naturally dare not have any objections. Wu Bing shook his head and replied respectfully. Hearing this reply, Lin Tian nodded with satisfaction before he could continue to speak. Click, 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 click. A burst of space fluctuations suddenly came over the city, and space gates opened one after another. The next moment, one after another, black shadows flew out of the space on demon hunting eagles. An extremely powerful killing intent instantly spread throughout the city. The chaotic killing intent turned some corpses that had already been turned into rubble into blood again. But the faces of everyone present were not moved at all. The originally wide venue instantly became densely packed with the arrival of this group of people. This is also the accumulation of the Soul Palace and the Shadow Palace over the past decades. It is also the capital that allows them to fight against demon race. Then three figures wearing the uniforms of the branch hall master jumped down from the sky and came to Lin Tian. They are two men and one woman. The man is tall and thick, with a strong body, while the woman has watery eyes and a graceful figure, like a hibiscus that has just emerged from the water. Seeing this, Lin Tian did not speak, but there was a trace of satisfaction in his eyes. Once the slander begins, this force will be on everyone's lips, causing the world to criticize, and spit out fragrance. This is equivalent to going to a restaurant to eat. Qin Xian sent 3 people to these 3 realms. The first was to eradicate the demon race forces, and the second was to let his Profound Heaven Sect gain more people's hearts. On the contrary, they avoid those with a bad reputation. After all, who knows if it's true or not? In the 10 domains, reputation is also very important. If you don't have a reputation, others will not join your force. The initial inaction of the human race temple was slandered and abused, causing its reputation to be ruined and discredited, causing the world to avoid it. Even if they kill, they can't finish the killing. After all, Qin Xian just wanted the world to see another disgusting appearance of the human temple. Because they can spread rumors everywhere and slander the shortcomings of this force, but you don't dare to do anything to them. Even if you jump into the Yellow River, your reputation won't be able to be washed away. This strategy is not vicious even if it is said to be vicious. If this is true, if they go to a restaurant with poor taste, aren't they asking for trouble and wasting money? At the same time, Tianliu and Huang Tianyu are also experiencing all this. The answer is obviously the latter. The strength of Immortal Emperor rank 5 was nowhere to be unleashed, and Qin Xian asked him to come out for this reason. On the contrary, killing would be counterproductive. When he met some people who were being chased by demon race, Lin Tian also tried his best to save them, gaining their favor and making them grateful. Unless you are so strong and invincible that you can directly overthrow everything, you will have to bear the insults of the world. There was a hint of murderous intent and passion in his eyes. Lin Tian put his hands behind his back and looked at a fierce battle taking place not far away. In the blink of an eye, half a month has passed. Although weak in strength, they are still a troublesome force once they gather together. He hasn't killed anyone in a long time. Even a smart person would not choose this way. In the past half-month, Lin Tian no longer knew how many demon race masters he had killed, but the only thing that was certain was that he had killed a dozen of the ancient sage masters. In this way, no matter how strong the human race temple is, it will collapse on its own, and when the time comes, the world will see another face of it. That is, after eradicating the magic beads, he took this opportunity to turn his attention to the human temple. Human hearts were of great help in annexing other realms after Profound Heaven Sect. As the saying goes, there is strength in numbers. Do you want to go to a restaurant that others say doesn't taste good? Or do you want to go to a restaurant that everyone praises? Lin Tian then led the 4 major branch palace masters to various places in the realm of life and death, and killed every demon race strongman he encountered. It's time to get down to business. Qin Xian sent 3 people to these 3 realms. In addition to eradicating demon race and gaining people's hearts, there was another conspiracy. I just want him to release some pressure. Rebirth of Fantasy, obtain the Sect system. Author, Red General. Chapter 455. And the number of people rescued from demon race has reached hundreds of thousands. In addition, Lin Tian did not hide their whereabouts this time. On the contrary, he also revealed his position of Profound Heaven Sect to save the world. This situation attracted many strong men to follow suit, and Lin Tian now had several strong ancient saints and the loyalty of dozens of saints in his hands. The prestige of Profound Heaven Sect was also at its peak at this time, spreading throughout the 10 realms. Although it cannot compare with the reputation of a top force like the Human Temple, it is still vast enough to cover a whole place. At this time, inside the demon race camp, the 3 elders of demon race, Demon Emperor Shuewuxia, and the powerful immortal emperors of demon race are all here. All of them had a slightly solemn look on their faces. Especially Shuewuxia, with a faint golden light in his eyes, as if he was thinking about something. This damn Profound Heaven Sect won't come out sooner or later, but it just comes out when our demon race is dealing with the Human Temple. How abominable! A rough and strong man slammed the table with a hint of dissatisfaction and helplessness in his tone. Seeing this situation, the other people said nothing, but their eyes showed the same expression as the strong man. It's just that they are not as courageous as the strong men. Otherwise we would have been spitting and insulting each other. Profound Heaven Sect. The 3 elders of demon race saw the strong man's expression and expressed understanding. They did not say anything, but looked at Demon Emperor Shuewuxia on the side. At this time, Shuewuxia also raised his eyes to look at the generals. After thinking for a while, he turned his attention to the great elder demon race. Profound Heaven Sect is a threat, but judging from the current situation of our demon race, this force cannot find any strength to deal with it. Otherwise, we will not be able to break through the immortal domain and seal the immortal domain, and all the hard work we have done before will be in vain. What should we do? There was a hint of doubt and worry on the great elder's face. Shwewuxia took a breath, stood up, glanced at everyone, and said softly, "Let me go. After all, only I can move now, and only I have the strength to deal with it." Everyone said nothing after hearing this. The great elder also sighed and nodded, "That's all we have to do." After all, none of them expected that Profound Heaven Sect would attack them at this time. What's more, he didn't expect that there would be people from the second palace hidden in all the major realms of the human race. This time they were careless. Then Shwewuxia's figure disappeared into the camp. After traveling through several spaces, we came to the realm of life and death. According to his understanding, the main force of Profound Heaven Sect this time is in the life and death domain. Although the strength of the other two domains is strong, it cannot compare with this one. After all, the life and death domain is led by Lin Tian. Shwewuxia glanced around and frowned slightly, but seemed to have noticed something. A pair of dark eyes revealed a glimmer of light, and he smiled evilly. "Found you." Then he appeared at a high altitude in a canyon at an extremely fast speed, and saw a scene of a group of strong men fighting. As the leader of this fight, Lin Tian did not participate in the battle, but stood in the void and watched quietly. But when he sensed the arrival of a strange aura, he couldn't help but become vigilant. After looking around, he spotted a man in black standing not far away. Seeing this, Lin Tian's eyes trembled, but he quickly hid it. With a move of his hand, he mobilized the power of the Great Dao to surround the area and turned it into a protective shield. Then he stepped in front of Shwewuxia. "You said that since I am the leader of a sect, why would I personally go out to do things?" Hearing this, Shwewuxia laughed, his dark eyes stared at him like a god of death, the corner of his mouth curled up, and he said, "Don't forget that I am also the master of the Profound Heaven section." Lin Tian was also suppressed by this breath and knelt down on one knee, his face pale. "Even God Dao body can't make up for it? What you say is quite funny. Why do I need to talk about the consequences of my actions? Is your Profound Heaven Sect Qin Xian still there?" An extremely violent demonic energy spread all around in an instant, turning into one ferocious demon after another. Unless it is the perfect heaven, Dao body is almost the same. The extremely powerful aura rushed directly towards Lin Tian. He was not frightened by the murderous intent displayed by Shwewuxia. "It's really ridiculous. If your sect master Qin Xian said this, it would be enough, but you? No. As a result of? Then I wonder if Lord Demon Emperor wants to kill me." This area was also instantly surrounded by terrifying laws. "This Emperor's dialogue with you is just to reward you and give you a good opportunity. If you don't cherish it, there is no need to talk about it." Shwewuxia frowned, with a hint of cruelty in his expression. The gap between the immortal emperor and the first ancestor is still too big. Seemingly not surprised by Shwewuxia's tone, he asked. Shwewuxia looked at Lin Tian with an arrogant expression. "I have killed so many strong demon race men. If you don't die, I will really feel uneasy." "Oh." Shwewuxia looked up at him with a hint of amusement in his eyes, crossed his arms, looked down at him, and said coldly, "What do you think? Since you know that Qin Xian is the master of our sect, you should also understand why I appear here today. Well, since the Demon Emperor wants to kill me, have you considered the consequences of killing me? Presumably the person in front of me is the famous Demon Emperor Shwewuxia, right?" His tone was full of disdain and ridicule, as if the person in front of him was just a dispensable person in his eyes. Seeing Shwewuxia's arrogant face and the disdainful expression at the corners of his mouth, He couldn't help but raise his eyebrows and said with a smile. The devil's ferocious face seemed to indicate that he wanted to devour everything here. Although you are very talented, your strength is still far from mine. Since you know the name of this emperor, why don't you kneel down and beg for mercy? But Lin Tian, who was kneeling on the ground, just laughed softly after hearing this, coughed out a mouthful of blood, looked at him, and said in a hoarse voice. The next moment, there was a click, and the void around him began to slowly tear apart, and soon turned into an extremely wide crack. Lin Tian nodded in relief and asked a question. But it wasn't over yet. There was another sound of breaking through the cracks, and one black spear after another emerged from it. Hearing this, Lin Tian smiled and didn't take it seriously. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Rebirth of Fantasy, Obtain the Sect System. Author, Red General. Chapter 456. When Shui Wuxia heard this, his pupils trembled and his eyes showed a look of shock. He looked at him and shook his head. Impossible. Even if he was rescued by that person that day, he would not have a chance to survive. Even if he survived, how strong would he be against me? You must know that all his meridians have been destroyed. After saying these words, Shui Wuxia's nervous mood calmed down a little, replaced by calmness. Hearing Shui Wuxia's words, Lin Tian nodded without hesitation and said, Yes, my master's meridians and internal organs were all destroyed in that battle, but who is he? He is a person who can fight against the Domain Lord at the Immortal Emperor level. This is enough to prove that he is extraordinary. Do you really think there is no one to protect my master? Do you still remember the way of heaven before the 10 Domain Lords were born? The way of heaven? Shui Wuxia let out a low drink, and said the words that made him awe and feel unoffended. His expression gradually became sluggish. But Lin Tian hadn't finished speaking yet. He continued. I am the sect leader of Profound Heaven Sect, but since I came out, it means that someone has taken the position of sect leader. Junior is bold and wants to ask Lord Demon Emperor to guess who is sitting in that position in Tianqian. I wonder if Lord Demon Emperor can guess it? Lin Tian showed a strange and unpredictable expression, his eyes were curious, and he seemed to be looking forward to Shui Wuxia's next words. But this sentence was like a bolt from the blue, hitting Shui Wuxia's mind, making his eyes somewhat dazed. He didn't care about Qin Xian at first, thinking he was just a genius, but after seeing that battle, he began to be afraid. He didn't know what was going on, but whenever he mentioned this name, his heart would start to tremble uncontrollably. It seems that this name is a forbidden curse that cannot be said. This was not because Shui Wuxia was like this, but because he was frightened when he saw that Qin Xian himself could resist the Domain Lord at the level of the Immortal Emperor. You know, under the Territory Lord's breath, he was like a mouse meeting a cat, being suppressed and kneeling on the ground, unable to breathe. However, Qin Xian was able to bear the aura of the Domain Lord with the former Emperor realm, and he was also able to bear the extremely terrifying Divine Thunder. Looking at Shui Wuxia's expression, Lin Tian smiled heartily, but still asked pretending to be confused. I wonder what's wrong with Lord Demon Emperor? Are you thinking about how to kill me to make it more painful? Hearing this, Shui Wuxia gave him a sharp look, and the terror that was originally released gradually subsided. Dozens of black spears behind him also turned into powder and disappeared. He slowly took a breath, looked at Lin Tian and said, Today, I will leave your life with you for the time being. When you and I meet in the future, I will take it. As soon as the words fell, Shui Wuxia's figure turned into black mist and disappeared. At this time, the battle over there was also over. But Lin Tian still stayed high in the sky without making any movement. It wasn't until someone finally came to him and called him that he came back to his senses. He looked at the direction where Shui Wuxia was leaving and shook his head. It's really pathetic. Some people are always afraid that a person will be protected by a strong person, and you will hesitate whether to kill him or not. But as soon as you hesitate, the result has been verified, which will create the best opportunity to kill that person by mistake. This is human nature. Lin Tian sighed slightly in his heart and led everyone away from here. On a mountain top, the figure of Shui Wuxia appeared here, but his expression was a little strange, as if he was hesitating about something. Finally, after thinking for a long time, he decided to leave. Return to the demon realm, billions of miles away. And he solemnly explained the matter to the demon lord in the demon palace. The demon lord's eyes lit up slightly, but he quickly hid them. Then he chuckled and said proudly, "What are you afraid of? Am I going to be afraid of him when he comes back? Just because he can withstand that divine thunder?" The demon lord smiled disdainfully, put his hands behind his back and said calmly, "Although that divine thunder is terrifying in your eyes, in my eyes it is just an ordinary bath." Having said this, his eyes revealed a hint of disappointment towards Shui Wuxia. "It's just a pity that you let him go. That situation was the best opportunity to kill him, but instead of cherishing it, you hesitated." Hearing this, a look of fear instantly appeared on Shui Wuxia's face. He knelt down on both legs and kowtowed. "Master, there is nothing I can do. After all, I am really afraid that the guy is really hiding behind the scenes and watching." After hearing Shui Wuxia's explanation, the demon lord didn't say much. He just waved his hand and said without changing his expression, "Okay, please step back. I need to be quiet now. If he comes back, it means that the enemy of my demon race is no longer the human temple." Seeing this, Shui Wuxia reluctantly stepped back. When he reached the outside of the demon palace, he stopped and looked at his hands. He couldn't help but fall into deep thought. Am I scared? Thinking back to those days, how terrifying was the reputation of the demon emperor's immaculate blood. In the 10 realms, when his name was mentioned, everyone was frightened and panicked, how majestic and domineering he was at that time. But now, thinking of this, Shui Wuxia shook his head and sighed. "I feel so disappointed in myself now." The dim light shone on his back, adding a touch of loneliness, and Shui Wuxia left alone like an old man in his twilight years. Maybe I should take a good look at myself. In the darkness, a man in black robe saw this scene, turned his eyes, showed a strange smile, and then disappeared from here. On the other side, the land of Dragon Ancestor. A space spread across the galaxy. The 3 deist figures were sitting cross-legged with each other, seemingly discussing something. After a while, an old man sighed helplessly, as if he had made some important decision. The old man stood up, leaned towards a handsome man, and said, "In that case, the fate of my dragon race will be left to you from now on." When the handsome man heard this, a smile suddenly appeared on his face. He then helped him up, nodded and said, "Don't worry Zilong, I will lead the dragon race on my behalf. You can rest assured that I will give you a reward after this matter is over." The old man didn't say anything when he heard this. Rebirth of Fantasy, obtain the Sect system. Author, Red General. Chapter 457. An old man on the side laughed loudly when he saw this, and seemed to be very satisfied with the old man's decision. But looking at the old man's melancholy expression, he quickly put away his joy, coughed slightly, patted his shoulder, and said comfortingly, "Old guy, you and I can rest assured that the fate of dragon race will be left to him. You have to believe that his fate will not change. Dragon race will also get better and better under his leadership." Xiaolong looked at him, nodded, and left with a cane. His already stooped body became even more stooped at this moment. Seeing this, Qin Xian on the side shook his head helplessly, and then smiled and nodded to the dream machine in front of him to express his gratitude. He knew that Xiaolong must have been persuaded by Meng Ji, otherwise he would have to wait for several years. Then he fabricated a wine pot out of thin air, drank it without hesitation in front of Qin Xian, and then asked, "It's time to make a decision." Immediately the figure disappeared into the Tiandao palace, and after a long time, it came to a mountain peak above the clouds. Here he met a man. "I've thought about it, but I want to know, after my heavenly Dao palace surrenders to you, profound heaven sect, what will you ask us to do? Then we must avenge ourselves." Menji's face trembled when he heard this, and he glanced at Qin Xian suspiciously, but in the end he seemed to have thought of something, nodded with satisfaction, and praised. After saying that, Menji's figure turned into a puff of white smoke and disappeared here. Seeing this scene, Xin Chen walked over and sat next to this man, with a look of helplessness on his face. The figure nodded. "I wonder what sect leader Qin's next plan is. Of course it's true. Could it be that I, Qin Xian, would still lie to you? Kunlun domain, inside the Temple of Heaven. After all, I, Qin Xian, am not a generous person. Since he can let me die once, then I can naturally let him die once. Yes, I'm very satisfied with your answer." "Really?" Xin Chen raised his eyebrows, looking a little suspicious. Seeing this, Menji waved his hand gently, indicating that it was okay. Xin Chen, who was dressed in white, closed his eyes tightly and sat cross-legged. "Then it will naturally be to expel the demon race, destroy the human temple, and allow me, profound heaven sect, to ascend to the title of the number one force in the human race." Hearing this, Xin Chen glanced at him, with a lot of thoughts in his mind, but in the end he nodded slightly and said, "Then." Qin Xian gave him an enigmatic look and softly uttered a word. "I hope you won't let us down, Master Qin." Immortal energy flows all over his body, surrounded by the great Dao, and he is as enigmatic as an immortal hiding in the mountains and forests. Sighing, he stood up. "I wonder if the master of Xin Chen Hall has thought about it? You don't need to do anything. The only thing you have to do is help us secretly after the battle." Xin Chen laughed, coughed slightly, then bowed slightly towards Qin Xian and said respectfully. The man also looked at the stars with curious eyes, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly, as if to ask, "Have you thought about it?" But the figure turned a blind eye and asked with a smile. Seeing this, Qin Xian, who was staying on the spot, chuckled lightly and said nothing, and his figure gradually disappeared in this space. After a while, Xin Chen seemed to feel something, opened his eyes, and looked outside the Tiandao palace. After hearing the question, the figure said calmly. Menji raised his eyebrows, "Then what?" Upon hearing the question, Qin Xian smiled slightly and replied, "That's it, the master of Dao Palace met the sect master that day." Rebirth of Fantasy, obtain the sect system. Author, Red General. Chapter 458. Qin Xian nodded slightly and helped him up. Afterwards, they had a chat for several hours. After the chat, Qin Xian left. Now that everything is ready, he only needs to wait for an opportunity before his profound heaven sect can truly be revealed to the world. The world may be surprised by then. Human Race Temple, inside the review hall. The master of the palace, Dylan, was sitting high on the throne, scanning the high-level officials with a pair of majestic eyes, and said in a deep voice, "You should all know what the two major forces under Profound Heaven Sect have done in the other three domains, right?" Everyone looked at each other after hearing this, and then nodded. Seeing this scene, Dylan knocked on the armrest and sneered. "Now that you know it, you should also understand what things you shouldn't touch and who you shouldn't talk to. I have discovered a problem. It seems that you didn't listen to a word of what I said before. On the contrary, it's even worse than before." After hearing this, everyone swallowed their saliva, did not dare to raise their heads and look directly at Dylan, and lowered their heads. But will Dylan let them go? It just so happened that something happened recently that made him feel upset and angry. Today is the day to let it all out. Dylan took a deep breath and walked down from the throne. With every step he took, the pressure on his body became heavier and heavier. Everyone present was blushing and a little out of breath. Some people were so shocked by this coercion that they spit out a mouthful of blood, but they still did not dare to make a sound. Then I saw Emperor Ling walking next to an angel. There are 3 major positions in the human race temple, namely 6 archangels, 8 elders, and 12 protectors. These are also the upper echelons of the human temple, and each of them controls the life and death of hundreds of millions of people. Chi Angel, shouldn't you come out and explain what happened recently and what you did secretly? Dylan's eyes were fixed on the person in front of him, as if he was looking at a dead person. After being asked this question, the angel immediately slumped down, with panic on his face, and kept kowtowing, begging for mercy. Palace Master, this subordinate made a mistake. Please spare my life, Palace Master. This subordinate will never make such a mistake again in the future. I will never disobey what the Palace Master said again. Really? Dylan looked at him with raised eyebrows, first glanced at the people nearby, then looked at him and said, "Then why did you disobey me this time? Did those guys give you any benefits?" Ah! Dylan pulled his throat hard, and the sound exploded in the angel's mind like a bell. Hearing this, the angel swallowed, the corners of his mouth moved, and he looked like he wanted to say something, but he seemed to be a little scared. In the end, the angel chose to kneel on the ground and kowtow vigorously, as if to avoid answering. Seeing this, Dylan's face showed a hint of disappointment, and the great Daola around him became more and more intense, as if he was ready to kill this person. But at this moment, a middle-aged man wearing a white robe and with a great appearance walked in. The aura emanating from his body is not inferior to that of Dylan at all, and there is a vague meaning of surpassing it. Seeing this situation, Dylan frowned, but in the end he cupped his hands towards this person and said with some respect, "Disciple Emperor comes to see Patriarch Su." The middle-aged man nodded slightly and walked towards here, looking at the pale expression on the angel's face. He frowned, turned to look at Dylan and scolded. "Dylan, we all belong to the same power, both emotionally and rationally. You shouldn't show such an imposing manner, let alone kill him. Even if he doesn't listen to you, so what? Does what he did threaten our human temple? As the master of the palace, you should be generous in everything you say and do, instead of blaming others for trivial matters." After hearing this, Dylan raised his head and glanced at him, his eyes showing a hint of murderous intent, but he still managed to hide it well, and he cupped his hands and said, "What the ancestor taught me is that Dylan will never make this mistake again next time." Seeing this scene, the middle-aged man nodded complacently, ignoring the fact that the emperor was here and helped the angel who was kneeling on the ground. He patted his shoulder and said slowly, "Don't do it again next time, and you must listen to Dylan's words carefully in the future, do you understand?" Hearing this, the angel nodded, and his anxious heart finally relaxed. When Dylan saw this scene, he just looked at the middle-aged man deeply and then returned to his seat. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Rebirth of Fantasy, Obtain the Sect System. Author, Red General. Chapter 459. Then the middle-aged man glanced at the senior executives, coughed heavily, stood with his hands behind his hands, and said in a deep voice, "I also know a little bit about what Profound Heaven Sect has been doing these days, and I also know that Profound Heaven Sect is spreading its name widely. Especially recently, I have heard in some people's ears the words of my human temple's initial inaction. For this voice, I hope you can suppress it and try not to let this sentence appear again. Do you understand?" There was a hint of murderous intent in the middle-aged man's eyes, and when he said this, his tone became a little more serious. It was enough to prove that these words made him feel extremely uncomfortable. When everyone heard this, they naturally understood the intention and nodded. Anyway, this was not the first time they had done this. Seeing everyone nodding, the middle-aged man said nothing more and glanced at Dylan behind him. That's all I have to explain. For the rest, you can do whatever Dylan says. Before Emperor Lin could say anything, the figure of the middle-aged man disappeared in the main hall, which seemed to mean that he came here just to express simple words. But Dylan heard a sense of threat in it. The human temple is indeed as powerful as outsiders say, but in fact it is riddled with holes inside and has embarked on a path of dilapidation. It is indeed true that the human race temple has 3 powerful ancestors. They were Dylan, this middle-aged man, and an old man hiding in the dark. It's just that these 3 powerful ancestors represent different camps. In fact, it's just a difference in thinking. The 2 founders of the human temple were too rigid in their thinking and thought that the human temple today was the same as the human temple back then. He still does things his own way, and relying on his status as an older generation, he often demonstrates in front of Emperor Lin. This also caused Dylan to have no good impression of the 2 ancestors. Despite this, he still chose to be patient as much as possible. Thinking of this, Dylan let out a breath and raised his eyes to look at everyone. Finally, his eyes fixed on the 2 men on the left and right. Under Dylan's gaze, the 2 men immediately lowered their heads, their eyes trembling, as if they were afraid that Dylan would vent his anger on them. Seeing this, Dylan didn't say anything. After thinking for a moment, he said, "You have all heard what Patriarch Su said just now. I will forget some things and forgive you. I hope you won't be seen by me next time, otherwise, you know." Hearing this, everyone nodded immediately. Afterwards, Dylan didn't pursue this matter too much and started talking about business. The recent actions of Profound Heaven Sect mean that the real enemy of our human temple is coming. The demon race is just the second thing. What we really have to face is this Profound Heaven Sect and the Soul Palace and Shadow Palace hidden in the dark. Right now, our human temple is at the forefront of all the major forces. There are rumors about our human temple everywhere. They say that the human race temple, do nothing, are selfish, and do everything only for myself. Ancestor Su also said just now that rumors have arisen, so we must suppress them with all our strength, otherwise the status of our human race's temple will be unstable. Hearing this, everyone nodded. Then Dylan didn't say anything else and waved everyone away. After everyone left, Dylan came to an extremely gorgeous palace and met the deputy palace master Jing Qing. Seeing Dylan's figure, Ji Qing's face was startled, but then she came to her senses, stood up weakly, leaned over and cupped her hands and said, "Jiking meets the palace master." Dylan nodded with a smile, came to his side, looked at him up and down for a while and then smiled with satisfaction. The place is dotted with stars and exudes vitality everywhere, just like a fairyland on earth. On the contrary, you should feel happy. Yes, what happened recently has given me a headache, and I feel more and more irritable when dealing with some things. After all, his disciple Qin Feng came from Profound Heaven Sect. The scene is so gorgeous that people can't take their eyes away. After all, he used to be one of the 8 peak masters of the Profound Heaven Sect, and his status is not necessarily any worse than that of Lin Tian. Hearing this, Dylan raised his eyebrows. "How do you say that?" Dylan clenched his fists, his eyes full of disdain and sneer at what demon race did at the beginning. Jiking smiled knowingly and replied. Seeing this, Dylan shook his head and without saying anything else, he brought Ji Qing to an endless galaxy. Dylan glanced at him and nodded faintly. "Is it the Profound Heaven Sect?" Jiking said with a frown. He naturally knows the strength of Profound Heaven Sect. "Master, don't forget, my apprentice Qin Feng also came from Profound Heaven Section." Emperor Lin frowned upon hearing this. It's all thanks to the palace master's careful care these days, otherwise I won't be able to recover from my injuries for decades. Who else but Profound Heaven Sect? But now the position of the sect leader has been decided. Even if Qin Feng goes back, can he really become the sect leader? In addition, the leader of the Profound Heaven Sect no longer exists, and the only threats to us are the two major forces, the Soul Palace and the Shadow Palace. But Jiking still had a smile on her face. Hearing this, Jiking smiled, cupped his hands and said. Jiking said nothing, but looked thoughtful. Dylan smiled and waved his hand. Stop flattering me. Your injuries were caused by our human temple. I was just doing my best. In addition, there are streams of Great Dao laws scattered here. The Great Dao is like a river, flowing in the galaxy. But in the blink of an eye, he seemed to have thought of something, his eyes glowed with a golden light, he looked at Dylan and cupped his hands and said. Over time, these annoyances accumulated together, making me feel a little less like myself now. Dylan smiled bitterly and nodded, helplessly saying. The master of the palace brought me here. You must have something on your mind that you want to talk to me about. Ji Qing, who was behind Dylan, saw the scene and his expression moved. After thinking for a moment, he hesitated and asked. Why don't we let Qin Feng go to Profound Heaven Sect and let him compete for the position of the leader of Profound Heaven Section? It seems that you are recovering well from your injury. Just one demon race can't make me feel irritated. From the beginning to the end, I never put demon race in my eyes. He was also somewhat confused about this force. Palace Master, in my opinion, there is no need for you to be upset about what Profound Heaven Sect has done recently. Rebirth of Fantasy, obtain the Sect system. Author, Red General. Chapter 460. Ji Qing smiled and nodded. Why not? The current Profound Heaven Sect is not the original Profound Heaven Sect, and those few immortal Emperor experts alone are no match for us. After all, Qin Feng also has our human temple behind him. We can let Qin Feng go back in the name of returning to the section. I believe that Profound Heaven Sect will never refuse Qin Feng's request. After Qin Feng enters, let him know some of the distribution of forces in Profound Heaven Sect, and we will directly lead some immortal Emperor experts to hide in the dark. When the time comes, directly control the sect leader of Profound Heaven Sect, and then seize the position of sect leader for Qin Feng. If we continue to publicize Qin Feng's goodness, Profound Heaven Sect will become the power of my human temple. After hearing this, Dylan's eyes lit up. He seemed to really think that this matter was feasible, but he thought of something and asked hesitantly. Are you sure Qin Feng will do this for us? As far as I know, he also came from the Profound Heaven section. Although he has lived in our human temple for decades, this does not mean that he is completely loyal to us. Are you sure that he will help us after you tell him the cause and effect? But Jiking still nodded. It's fine that you don't need to tell him the truth. You can tell him after the matter is completed. That's fine. Seeing this, Dylan nodded slightly. This is indeed the best way at the moment. However, to be on the safe side, Dylan will also watch in secret at this time to prevent any unexpected events. Ji Qing then summoned Qin Feng. Master, I don't know what I want to tell you when you call me here. Qin Feng stepped towards the main hall, arched his body slightly, and asked with a little respect in his tone. Jiking glanced at him and said softly. My master is calling you here this time because I want you to do something for me in the human temple. What's the matter? Qin Feng raised his eyebrows. In his impression, his master never needed his help, let alone doing anything. Basically, Qin Feng lives alone. Unless he encounters difficulties in cultivation, Ji Qing will never let him do anything. This made him smell a hint of conspiracy. Jiking looked at him with a smile and put her hands behind her back. She did not immediately answer what she asked him to do, but asked. Do you want to go back to Profound Heaven Sect? Hearing this, Qin Feng looked stunned and fell into a daze, but then he quickly reacted and said hesitantly, "Master, do you want to hear the truth?" Ji Qing nodded. Seeing this, Qin Feng took a breath, cupped his hands and replied, "Disciple really wants to return to profound heaven section after all, only there can I feel the taste of home. But this does not mean that the disciple will betray the human temple and the master." Hearing this, Ji Qing nodded. He was not surprised at all when Qin Feng said this, because he had already guessed that Qin Feng would say this. Ji Qing still knew a lot about his apprentice. In that case, then go back to profound heaven section. As your master, I can understand how you feel. If you want to go back, then go back. Just do one thing for me as a teacher. Of course, it will be very beneficial to you. Ah! Qin Feng's expression was slightly startled, and his eyes were dull, but he seemed to have thought of something, and his expression instantly disappeared. The originally dark eyes showed a glimmer of light. He felt a bad premonition in it, but he couldn't guess who gave out this premonition. Is it possible? Thinking of this, Qin Feng raised his eyes and looked at Ji Qing, only to see Ji Qing looking at him with expectant eyes. He seemed to really want him to answer. Seeing this scene, Qin Feng did not reply immediately, but thought for a while and then said, "Then can the master tell the disciple what to do?" Hearing this, Ji Qing smiled softly, shook his head and said, "Master, I can't tell you this matter for now. I won't tell you until you return to the section." Hearing this, Qin Feng nodded and didn't feel like saying anything more, so he bowed and retreated. Looking at Qin Feng's leaving figure, Ji Qing sighed softly. "Disciple, I have no choice but to use you as my master this time. I hope you can understand in the future." Afterwards, Qin Feng returned to his residence. On the way back, he kept thinking about what he had just talked to Ji Qing in his mind. Especially the fact that he didn't answer any questions about how he could help made Qin Feng feel even more strange and conspiracy. But after thinking for a while, he couldn't figure out the reason, so he simply stopped thinking about it. He just reviewed this information and gave it to Qin Xian. Immediately, Qin Feng slowly exhaled and looked into the darkness. The next moment, one of the figures in black robes was seen walking out, like a dark lone traveler. Then the figure came to Qin Feng's side, cupped his hands and said, "Master, what do you want to tell me?" Upon hearing this, Qin Feng glanced at him and said calmly, "I will return to profound heaven sect in a short time, so I will leave all matters here to you." Upon hearing this, the black-robed figure's eyes flashed, but he still nodded respectfully. As commanded. Immediately the figure disappeared into the hall, as if it had never appeared before. Qin Feng turned a blind eye to this and sat cross-legged on the ground. Now, under his leadership, the Shadow Palace has infiltrated various positions in the human temple and served as important people. Even some angels were controlled by the Shadow Palace and became puppets under his feet. It is precisely because of this that some people did not listen to Dylan's words, which led to some things happening. But this is what Qin Feng wants to see. In the blink of an eye, 3 days have passed. Qin Feng returned to profound heaven sect alone. In mid-air, Qin Feng stood on the fire eagle and looked at the huge sect under his feet with his hands behind his back. Speaking of which, he hasn't been back here for more than 10 years. Although he is a clone, he also has some feelings. Then Qin Feng did not hesitate and controlled the fire eagle to fly towards the profound heaven sect. At this time, 3 streams of light appeared on a mountain peak not far from profound heaven sect. Watching Qin Feng step into the sect, the 3 daoist figures looked at each other, communicated with each other for a moment and then disappeared. Profound heaven sect, in the resplendent and majestic Tianqian Palace. Lin Tian sat on the throne with an indifferent expression, his dark eyes as dark as a spring. The aura exuding from his body makes people feel awe and a sense of surrender. At this moment, high-level officials from Profound Heaven Sect stood on both sides of the hall. In the center of the hall, Qin Feng, dressed in black, stood respectfully. When other senior executives saw Qin Feng's figure, there was a trace of doubt and confusion in their eyes, and they began to talk in soft voices. The hall suddenly resounded with the sound of discussion. Some people say that Qin Feng is a traitor who betrayed his clan and went to the human temple in order to gain strength. Some people say that Qin Feng is not a traitor. It was him who called Ji Qing to save some people. Everyone present had different opinions. Only the great elder Leng Wu, the 8 peak masters of the Profound Heaven Sect, the 7 peak masters and other powerful people showed dull expressions. After all, only they knew the reason why Qin Feng left the sect. Qin Feng, who was standing in the center of the hall, naturally heard everyone's conversation, but he turned a blind eye to it. Pretending not to see it. Only the jade pendant worn by Qin Feng gave off a glimmer of light.